Hey everyone, it's good to see you all here. Nice to have you here at 1111 downtown. And what a beautiful day. Hope you're going to get a chance to get out and enjoy the day. Some this afternoon afterwards. It's a really pretty day. The rain's been wonderful, and it's always great. Spring's such a fun time to experience all the rain and all the new growth afterwards. And it's good to have you all here this morning. I'm hoping you're registering your attendance, that you've been doing that while the music was playing. If not, do that while I'm making a few quick announcements. One or two that we want to highlight especially. First of all, some of you all know Carol Roberts, have known Carol Roberts as one of our newer ministers, and she's one of our associates. Came on this last year and was temporarily assigned here and then thought maybe it would be a permanent assignment. She's been working with the prayer groups. Some of you, I think, took one of her prayer classes. And we're just announcing today that we discovered this week that she'll be moving. You know, that's the way us Methodists do sometimes. Not me, because I'm a weird kind of Methodist. So I'm likely to get moved. I'm just going to disappear one day. But I'm also a deacon and not an elder, so that's a different kind of thing, but that's a whole different story. But she's an elder, and part of the elder process is that we itinerate and we move from time to time, and she's being appointed to Brownwood, where she'll serve two small churches. So we're just making an announcement to all of our congregations. Those of you who've known her, she's been a real blessing to our congregation, doing some cool and new things for us, and so she'll be missed. But there'll be a celebration for her in June. More about that to come. A couple of other highlights. You'll see a class on LGBTQ and the Bible, which is a fascinating class. Genya Rodriguez, our most recent PhD, just got her PhD in New Testament. Yes, she's amazing. And some of you have met her, and she's going to teach a class. She's been teaching this class, small groups. It's really informative and interesting. I mean, we're an inclusive community in here and an affirming community in here. We pretty much all know that, but it's still an interesting and fascinating look at the historical context of what these texts are really saying in the Bible. And it's a nice way to kind of know where you stand if you feel like you need to come have some kind of response to someone else who's arguing against that. So she does a great job of teaching that. If you can make one of those classes, that'd be great. Spring Trash Bash. Spring Trash Bash. Charminai, we've got a group. We want to see you out there collecting litter with us on the 18th of May. And it's going to be a lot of fun, citywide kind of thing. We've got a particular area we're going to be doing it, location 2. And I forget where that is exactly. That's Cold Springs area. So you go online here, sign up, and you put that area. You give them that name. We're the 1111 downtown team. And you'll be a part of our team. And we're going to have a lot of fun that day and picking up trash and cleaning up along Trinity River and stuff. So hope you can be a part of that with us. Yes. Oh, it's just 9 to 11, not 9 to 1. But there is an after party at Panther Island. Yes, and we'll be there. And it will be fun. Okay, so hope you can join us for that. Get online and sign up. Let us know, too, if you would like. You can email us, let us know you did that. I think that's all. The rest of that's pretty self-evident. Is there something else I'm missing here? Okay, we're glad you're here. Let's begin with our welcome candle.
Morning. If you'll join me for the welcome candle. Come, come, wherever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving. It doesn't matter. Ours is not a caravan of despair. Come. Even if you have broken your vows 1,000 times, come yet again.
Bless my heart. May we pray? Holy One, we give thanks for all the people and things and impulses in our lives that have helped us to hold on to this point. We give thanks for those things and people that are still at work in our lives, helping us to hold on. We acknowledge that life is confusing and really hard sometimes, and so we give thanks that, hey, we made it here today. May we be people that look into each other's faces and offer words of kindness and encouragement and help. And may we also remind ourselves and each other of all of the good that there still is in this world, including all of us. And so we give thanks for this time together, for the blue sky of May, for the music we enjoy so much here, and for, of course, the joy of seeing each other here week after week. We give thanks in the name of the one in whom we live and move and have our being. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Charm. Hey, I'd like you all to stand and sing with us right now, would you please? And also, happy Cinco de Mayo. Hola. Buenos dias. We're going to sing this next song in Spanish just to celebrate Cinco de Mayo. I hope you're ready. Something's telling me to mention the offering. I don't know what it is, but this would be a great time during this song to definitely bring your offering to the table. Here we go, y'all. Here we go. Lyrics on the screen. Y'all ready? We know this river always keeps flowing. We will be rowing our whole lives long, yeah. And we may never know where we're going, but we can go there singing a song. Good, let's do another one. Just like the mother to a child she's holding, just like a soldier marching alone, just like the faithful on Sunday morning, raising our voices, singing a song. All right. Eyes will shine, but not as bright. Arms will hold, but not as tight. When a word is only spoken. So give it feeling, give it right. Sing it in full quarter time. Singing with the heart wide open. Sing of the beauty right there beside you. Bring it inside you, making you strong. So that when trouble comes round to greet you, still it will leave you singing a song. Solo time. All right. Let's sing together. Eyes will shine. Eyes will shine, but not as bright. Arms will hold, but not as tight. When a word is only spoken. So give it feeling, give it right. Lay it in for quarter time. Sing it with a heart wide open. And may the music of life over overtake us, till angels mistake us for a heavenly throne. And may that joyful sound be our shelter and bind us together, singing the song. We'll be together, singing the song. Yeah. Nice work, you guys. That crazy instrument Kevin Grove is playing actually belonged to Jim Miller's father. It's a 1950s something, 1930s something. Hey, take a moment, would you please, and offer one another a sign of peace. Practice your Spanish on your friends. Let's go.
I'm going to invite everybody to find your seat. So this morning we're continuing this theme. We're doing sort of 4 weeks in this after Easter theme of resurrection stories. And this morning the theme is practicing resurrection. But I want to share a story from one of our members who I thought would be here this morning. He did approve and agree to give me permission to show this. For a number of years, I headed up something called Story Arc, and it's still kind of in limbo, kind of in hiatus right now. But it was a process where some of us in here, as well as members from around the church, created digital stories online, little 3- and 4-minute digital stories based on moments in our life that may have been transformative, or where something seemed one way, and then all of a sudden it became something else. Sort of like resurrection. It was a sort of like when things seemed everything was okay for a while, and then all of a sudden we learned, no, there's a truth behind this that was more painful than we realized, and yet something else blossomed out of that. And so Daryl Parker, he and Laura, members here, had done one story that was about growing up in Watts, where he grew up in Los Angeles, and especially during the time of Rodney King as a young man. He was a teenager, young adult there. And so he had quite an interesting experience as well as growing up in fundamentalist Christian background. And so I'm going to share his story. We're going to pick it up kind of about a minute or so into it, and then just let it play out. But keep that in the back of your mind as we're thinking about these resurrection stories, where things seem one way, and somehow we discover something new even in the midst of some of that difficulty or pain or obstacle.
In LA, rain was sparse, but when it rained, yep, it poured. In the middle of sudden downpours, small windows opened up, and the rain ceased momentarily. Let the games begin. A flooded backyard, a piece of scrap wood, and 2 free spirits. In an instant, I put it all together in my head. 1. Place the wood at the edge of the flood. 2. Take a riding and running start to the wood. 3. Jump on. Yeah, baby, surf's up. With excitement, we skimmed across the water, 10 to 15 yards, hanging 10 over and over until we were exhausted. Another perfect day of adventure. During my high school years, I had the opportunity to attend an international boarding school nestled in the hills of Newbury Park, California. This was my childhood fantasy come true. A melting pot of people, places, and experiences, a whole new world of adventure was open to me with some unexpected cost. My days were spent learning and exploring new and wondrous things, and defending myself from verbal and physical abuse, because I was different. An undersized, wonder-filled kid from LA with an imagination the size of the Grand Canyon. I was different in me, but that shouldn't matter. Eventually, I started fitting in with kids like me who were different. The skateboarder and punk kids, the nerds and rockers, the fringe crowd that dared to be different. And the bullying continued. Until one day, I was adopted by another group, the Korean kids. The Korean kids were the feared and fearless, and this was my new family. However, hate would continue to remind me that I was different. When I heard this for the first time, I died a little inside. In a moment, I became painfully aware that I was different and not me. You stupid nigger. I could not understand it. Why would this widely respected, born-again, high academic use such hateful words? I would live with this scar for many years. This uninvited label insisted that I was different, truly different, for reasons I never fully understood. Needless to say, the ugliness of humanity slowly shadowed, no desecrated my innocence. I was different. It mattered. Our natural tendencies are to live in wonder, curiosity, and connection. However, we are raised in a world that teaches us fear, a fear that makes us violently and quietly aware of our differences. My experiences and journey have shown me that love, God, wants to walk with us in the wonder, mystery, and uncertainty of life. God wants to live in us through our connections with humanity. But we must dare to be different. Dare to be you. In LA, rain was sparse.
That got kind of clipped in different ways there. So I clipped off the beginning, the ending got clipped off. I want you to go to the website, the church website, and hear the rest of it, because Daryl put this thing together himself. In addition to this being a profound story of his own, he also put together all the soundtrack and all the images and stuff, and it has a great ending as well. So I hope you'll get a chance to get online on the First United Methodist website and see his story, as well as some of the other stories. And then if you're ever interested in doing one of these stories, just email me, contact me, and we'll get involved in the process. It's quite transforming itself and a lot of fun. So thanks, Daryl, very much.
Yeah, right on, man. We're moving into our Kairos time now. I'm going to invite you to sing while you're seated. Just sing this song with us. Here we go. Right here. All shall be well. All shall be well. All manner of things shall be well. All shall be well. One more time. All shall be well. All shall be well. All manner of things shall be well. All shall be well. shall be well. All shall be well. All manner of things shall be well. All shall be well.
As we continue our Kairos time, this is our time, visitors, when we stop. We sit still together, we breathe together, we quiet our minds and our bodies. Today, while you do that, I'd like to call your attention to the picture on your worship bulletin. And if you would, as you take your deep breaths and your slow exhales, please focus on that picture. I'll give you time just to get set now. Just take some deep breaths, slow exhales. Relax your jaw, perhaps your shoulder blades a bit. And focus on that picture. Maybe breathe in words like hope, tenacity, stubbornness. All of these things baked into the cake of resurrection. Don't worry about the noises around us. They are part of our resurrection. Everything is. Just breathe. May we all be at peace. Amen.
Let us now hear the first 7 verses of the final chapter of the book of John. After these things, Jesus showed himself again to the disciples by the Sea of Tiberias. And he showed himself in this way. Gathered there together were Simon Peter, Thomas, called the twin, Nathanael of Cana in Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 others of his disciples. Simon Peter said to them, I am going fishing. They said to him, we will go with you. They went out and got into the boat, but that night they caught nothing. Just after daybreak, Jesus stood on the beach, but the disciples did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to them, children, you have no fish, have you? They answered him, no. He said to them, cast the net to the right side of the boat, and you will find some. So they cast it, and now they were not able to haul it in, because there were so many fish. That disciple whom Jesus loved said to Peter, it is the Lord. When Simon Peter heard that it was the Lord, he put on some clothes, for he was naked, and jumped into the sea.
It shone like gold. It shone like gold. But just as the moon loving me love's not enough? What if I'm falling, can meant to get up? Oh, I wish for once could stay cold, could stay all of my dreams, they fallen from a bridge of memories. When I can get back, all of my dreams, they fallen from a bridge of memories. Where I can get back to you. What if the hard work ends in despair? What if the road won't take me there? Oh, I wish for once could stay cold. What if your love and your love's not enough? What if I'm falling, can bear to get up? Oh, I wish for once could stay cold, could stay
That's really beautiful. So good to have Avery Vaughn with us as well. Y'all, we just say hi to Avery. It's always amazing and wonderful to have Elena, and when we have Claire with us, Claire couldn't be with us, and so Avery came over. She sings in the choir over in the main sanctuary. If you've ever heard her over there, she's like operatic. You know, it's just amazing. And we were walking down the hall earlier this morning, and it's like, this is so amazing. You go from opera to pop to blues, back to opera, and all of our folks are so talented, but it's fun to have her over here. So thanks for being with us again. And this song by First Aid Kit, we've heard, some of us have heard this one before, and the band's done it before, but this image, this question, what if the love that we have isn't enough? What if the work that we work ends up in despair? What if the road that we're on doesn't take us there, right? I mean, we live with these anxieties. And for those of you who are visiting, I mean, the way that we design this service is like a narrative. I mean, basically, our hope is that the worship service itself sort of preaches the sermon, and there's really no need for me to be here. But I have to be, because that's what I get paid for. And so, as well as to put the service together. But in a sense, all of these pieces start falling together, and that's why we use the secular music. That's why we use images and music that we live and that we breathe with day to day, and that we find inspiring. And sometimes we see these things differently. Resurrection is all about seeing, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But what I want you to leave with, at least one important thing, is that resurrection is less about a ticket or a stamp or a fire insurance, kind of proposal. It's really about seeing differently, everything differently. And it happens day to day and moment to moment, and sometimes even in the midst of resurrection, we feel like the road's not going to take us there. And sometimes even in the midst of resurrection, we feel like the love we're giving isn't enough, or the love we're getting isn't enough. But that's what resurrection is. It's about something that's deep within that very question. You don't run from it, you don't leave it, you don't step aside from it. It's actually in the question itself. So that's kind of what we do here, and it's kind of fun, and sometimes it makes a whole lot of sense, and sometimes you might leave go, I'm not sure I understand any of that. I'm not sure where that connects, but I guarantee you will leave with some image that is going to haunt you in the very best way. I deeply believe that. So I'm going to tell you a story to start off. Linda tells this story. If you heard her in the service over in the main sanctuary, the two of us are preaching the same text. Linda suggested this story. I said, well, I could rewrite it and say it was my Uncle Mac that said that. And she said, yeah, unless they heard me tell my story. Which one are you going to think they're going to believe isn't lying? So Linda tells this story about one of her many summers that she spends up at her favorite place, which is in Indiana. It's her favorite place on earth. It's her grandfather's farm, her grandparents' farm. And I visited the place a few times with her. We'd been dating since teenagers, and I visited there with her. It's got huge maples that line the driveway, and rows of corn as far as you can see in Indiana and on their property. Animals everywhere, farm animals, dogs, cats, chicken, cattle, sheep. It's a big farmhouse and a big barn that's filled with cousins and uncles and aunts and lots of love and lots of mischief. And some of her experience was kind of mixed because of this mischief. Because being the youngest of all of the kids, she was also the object of a lot of the mischief. Like, for example, blindfolding her and leaving her all alone at the far end of a cornfield with 9-foot stalks all around. Sometimes she wouldn't show up for supper, and her aunt would say, "Tim, where's your sister?" And it's as if they'd forgotten all about her. You know, it was getting late into the evening, and they'd said, I hope she's out on the other side of the cornfield still. Or they'd make her stick her finger in a light socket at the top of the stairs while they'd flip the switch at the bottom. It was an initiation. If you want to play with us, you got to go through this. She always survived. Turned out okay after a few years of therapy. I met her Uncle Jim, and he was an amazing guy. He was huge, a big, muscular farmer, red hair, and he had all these freckles and a great sense of humor that had the family in stitches all the time. One time, when Linda was about 9, she tells this story, how she was eating ice cream with Jim in the backyard after dinner. The sun had already set, and Uncle Jim had stretched his arms, and then he'd said, "You know what? It's time to go to bed. Have to get up at the crack of dawn." And this struck Linda as kind of funny. So she asked him, "Uncle Jim, is there really a crack of dawn?" He said, "Sure." She said, "It's a crack? Like you can hear it?" He said, "Sure you can hear it. Every morning, just as the sun comes up over the horizon, there's a crack, like the sound of a baseball bat hitting the ball. Or maybe it's more like the sound of a large tree limb snapping after too much weight. But not everyone can hear it," he said. And Linda paused for a moment, and then she looked at him, and she said, "Then how come you can hear it?" Now, the title of this sermon could have been "Listening for the Crack of Dawn" or "The Break of Day," because in some ways the story takes place at the crack of dawn. It's one of my favorite stories. Who doesn't like a good fish tale? And as Kathy recognized when she was reading it, I really appreciate you obviously either knew this from heart or you went back and read it in the Bible itself, but it's the very last chapter of the book of the Gospel of John. And you may remember the rest of the story. It's kind of lengthy, so I didn't want to burden her with reading it, and I thought I'd summarize it. But as the rest of the story goes, when Peter jumps off the boat and he swims 100 yards or so back to the shore, the other disciples are left reeling in, pulling in as much of that net as they can. Takes them some time, so they catch up a little bit later. And they meet Peter and the others gathered around Jesus and a fire, and he's frying fish. It's not usually the story that we think about with the loaves of fishes. I mean, we usually think about the story of Jesus having the Last Supper with his disciples, having the bread and the wine. Or we think of the story of the 5,000 that were fed on the side of the hill when Jesus and his disciples find a little boy with the fish and one loaf of bread and ends up feeding 5,000 with it. Curiously, John is the only one that tells this story. He doesn't have the Last Supper story in his gospel, and he's the only one that tells this story of a morning fish fry. So if this had been the only gospel that had survived, we'd all be having fried fish on communion. It's the second story of the loaves and fishes, and it happens not with great crowds, as I said, but it happens on the beach at the first of the rays. It's interesting in the fact that these disciples are out fishing. 3 years they've been traveling around with Jesus. Their boat's been off to the side somewhere. Their fishing career laid up on the side. They've been traveling all over the countryside with Jesus these 3 years. He's executed, and a few weeks later, they're out on the lake or on the Sea of Galilee, and they're fishing. It's a little strange in the context of what's been happening. So it strikes you, maybe as it does me, a little odd. Because here they are back in this familiar area as if nothing had happened, as if nothing had really changed. Now, the United Methodist Bishop William Willimon, he says this. He says, you have to be a really dull person to walk away from a resurrection. And then to have been personally met by the risen Christ, which they have these stories prior to this one of them meeting Jesus after the resurrection. And then you still go back to the way things were, to fishing. But then I think about Easter Sunday, right? And I look out at the crowd today. 2 weeks ago, there were 225 people in here. But now we're kind of back to the way things are, and summer Sundays, and spring Sundays, and busy schedules, and we're back to our routines, and maybe that's just what resurrection people are. We just go back to being normal. Now, they'd been fishing since the early hours, hadn't caught anything. So it wasn't a bad symbol for the way they might have been feeling. Empty, nothing had changed. Jesus wasn't the Messiah they thought he'd be. Then as the morning begins to lift, they look over on the horizon and they see on the beach a man who's waving at him saying, "Have you caught anything?" And they say, "No." They don't recognize him. And then he says, "Well, cast your nets on the other side." And they're thinking, what the heck? They cast their nets on the other side. Suddenly the fish are just dropping. They practically are jumping in the boat, but they're overflowing in the nets. They can't even pull them in without risking falling into the water. And then Jesus looks over and he sees, as the dawn's breaking, he sees it looks like Jesus. And Jesus says, "Come have breakfast." Peter jumps in the water. A couple of thoughts, just right off the bat. 2 quick thoughts. Just hold on to them as I'm thinking through the rest of this sermon. The first is, if you're feeling completely overwhelmed, stuck in the same patterns, back to the same routine, unproductive, self-sabotaging, maybe you're self-incriminating, maybe you have self-incriminating thinking and thoughts. As always, you're facing an obstacle or challenge, or you're running out of answers, or it doesn't seem like the love is enough to get you there, or the road is going to get you where you need to go. If all of that's happening, maybe you need to cast your nets on the other side. That's the first thought. What is it that Einstein says? You don't solve a problem with the same kind of thinking that got you into the problem. Doesn't necessarily mean turn away, look away. Maybe casting your net on the other side is being willing to go deeper into what's going on. Maybe it's being willing to peel back a little bit to get more into what's happening. Just hang on to that idea. And then the second thought is this that comes to mind, that I think is the most important part of this whole story. And that is the excessive abundance of love and sustenance that the story suggests is at the heart of life. Peter and the others pull out their net, and their nets are overflowing with too much fish. I mean, there is something unnecessary about this story if it were simply meant to be a historical reckoning of Jesus being seen again. I mean, what a waste. All of this fish, there's too much fish. They can't possibly clean all these fish in time. They can't possibly save all these. They have to throw a lot of them back or it all go to waste. But this story, which I think is so wonderful about John's gospel, this story has nothing to do with historical reckoning and everything to do with sacred depth and transformation. Because at the heart of this story, what it is telling us, that at the depths of our lives is an abundance of sustenance and a depth of meaning and the possibility of joy that we rarely know how to tap into, especially in times of loss or pain or anger or confusion. The way that John Shelby Spong puts it at the end of his book, as he wrote his last book, Unbelievable, is he puts it, he says, what we are called to be about as people of faith, as people of the new kingdom or the new kingdom, what we're called to be about is to love wastefully. What would that be like, to love wastefully? That's what this story is about. This story is simply a reminder that at the very depths of our being, there is abundance. There is something to tap into. Paul Tillich called this the ground of our being, right? We use that phrase a lot. But its ultimate acceptance is what it means. It's something that, if you don't mind me saying, Daryl, it's something you tapped into. It's something we all tap into in some of the most difficult times of our lives, is this sense that we have this deep purpose and acceptance for being here. No matter what's happening, there's something more that's there. No matter what stories people tell us about us, or what stories we've created to tell ourselves about us, there's something bigger and larger than that that's at the very depth of our being. They're not tall tales. John Wesley called it grace. They're not historical recollections. They're sacred tales that are told 50 to 70 years after Jesus had been executed. The way that we remember a particular story about an uncle or a dear friend or a loved one or a particular experience, the way we remember these stories transforms or buries our lives, right? So many ways in which the stories we tell and the stories we read with a certain way of seeing end up burying us. John's gospel in particular is mystical language meant to speak to the depth of being itself. So you'll notice in John's gospel there's no nativity story that connects Jesus to the Davidic line of Judaism, like the other three gospels have, because John isn't concerned about that. John says that who Jesus was, who God is at the very depth of the cosmos. And so what does he say? In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. And the Word was God, and the Word became flesh, and the Word was light of life, and the Word was light in the darkness. The Word was the crack of dawn. He connects God and Jesus to the whole of cosmos. The rest of the story that Kathy started, it ends with Peter and Jesus and the rest of the disciples sitting around the fire. They're eating, and then Jesus turns to Peter, and he says, "Do you love me?" And Peter says, "Of course I love you." And he says it 3 times. Jesus says, "Peter, do you really love me?" And Peter says, "Are you listening?" "Of course I love you." Says it the 3rd time to the point of annoyance. And Peter says to Jesus, "I love you." And Jesus says, "Then feed my sheep." And it's the end of the gospel. That's basically where the gospel ends. There's this idea that I think resurrection is experienced when we practice it. A student approached his teacher, and he asked her, "Where shall I look to wake up?" And she says, "Look here." He says, "Here? Well, when will it happen?" She says, "It's happening right now." He says, "But then I don't see it." She says, "It's because you do not look." "Well, no, I'm looking. What should I look for?" he asks. And she says, "Nothing. Just look." "But at what?" he persists. She says, "Anything your eyes set on." He smiles and he says, "Okay then, must I look in a special kind of way?" She says, "No. The ordinary way of looking will do." And he says, "But don't I always look in the ordinary way?" And she says, "No, you don't." He says, "Why not?" And she said, "Because, you see, you must be here to be looking. But when you're looking, you're always trying to be somewhere else." Have you ever experienced that sudden insight, those break of dawn moments where suddenly, because you've been paying attention, because perhaps you've gotten to that place where you've finally been forced to break open, and suddenly you see something more than you thought was there. And suddenly your sorrow became joy, or your life, when it felt bleak or hopeless, suddenly became something to hope for. The word of Barbara Brown Taylor says it this way: one moment it all looks hopeless, and then the next you see possibilities you never thought were there. One moment your problems look too big to be budged, and the next one you discover there are handles on it. One moment the net looks empty, and the next it's overflowing, as if life was there all along in the midst of the darkness. Mark Nepo says it this way: if you're going to be awake, wakefulness is not a destination. It's a song that the human heart keeps singing the way birds keep singing when the light begins to break the dawn. I want to say to you, resurrection isn't a one-time event. Resurrection is not something that happens and it's like an insurance policy, but resurrection is something that we actually have to participate in. It is actually the grunt work, the everyday life that matters. The moment-to-moment tedium, the frustration, the fear, the bursts of insights. It's recognizing that magic comes in the mundane, that hope breaks through the hopelessness. But we have to get there together. Feed my sheep. we have to do it together. That's why the story ends that way. That's why it reminds us that the abundance doesn't happen for you or I in our isolation. It happens for us when we work together. Because feeding someone who's hungry doesn't change them. It provides sustenance, but it changes us. Because visiting someone who's in prison doesn't free them. It provides comfort and contact, but it frees us. Because listening to someone who's dying or who's in pain or grieving doesn't resurrect them, but it connects us to the depths of life in the midst of sorrow and challenges of loss. Resurrection is about practice and how we get there together. So when Linda asked Uncle Jim at the end of her story, she said, "When do you hear it?" Uncle Jim told her this: "It takes some courage to wake up in that kind of darkness. Just as you step outside, you're hardly awake. You're kind of groggy. You may still be a little fussy because you really didn't want to wake up. But then you step into the early morning and it's still really dark. At that hour, you can look up in the sky and you can still see all those stars. And it's pretty awesome. And all of a sudden, if you're paying attention," he said, "you feel really small. But you don't feel unimportant. It's as if you hear something saying something, as if you almost hear something like a crack that just opens up your ears and you hear something saying, 'You get to be a part of this. You matter.' And then suddenly it's like you just woke up and you smile because even though it's another day, it suddenly feels like something brand new."
Fickle my heart and how woozy my eyes. I struggle to find any truth in your lies. Now my heart stumbles on things I don't know. This weakness I feel I must finally show. Lend me your hand, we'll conquer them all. Lend me your heart and not just let you fall. Lend me your eyes, I can change what you see. Your soul you must keep totally free. Heart, 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 heart. I'll wake my soul. See my eyes. I struggle to find any truth in your lies. Now my heart stumbles on things I don't know. This weakness I feel I must finally show. Heart, 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 heart. In these bodies we will live. These bodies we will die. Will you invest your love? You invest your life. In these bodies we will live. In these bodies we will die. Will you invest your love? You invest your life.
I invite you all to stand with me as we have our blessing. Folks, if you're not singing that song as you walk out the building today, and as you make your way throughout the week, awake my soul, we are meant to meet our Maker in every moment that we live our lives, in every encounter that we have. That's where we meet our Maker. That's where we meet our soul itself. I hope you can find that inspiration this week. Let's take one another's hands, and next week we're going to have some fun with some more resurrection stories, and we'll actually, I won't say what we're going to do. You might not show up if I tell you what we're going to do. Hope to see you again. Let's pray. Holy One, as we make our way from this space together, as we make our way from this sacred gathering of one another in community, may we be reminded that we are always walking in the depths of your being, that we are always walking just above the surface of being awake, and yet you are always inviting us to open up. May we find that wonder and that openness and that hope and that joy in all of the encounters we have, in all of the moments we live, in the mundane as well as in the magic. Bless us as we leave this place in the name of the one in whom we live and move and have our being. Amen.